Hey, good morning. It's Sunday, July the 20th. We're covering the continued fallout this morning of the Trump administration's handling of the Epstein files, including a new deep dive from the New York Times into the president's friendship with the late financier and convicted sex offender, and new reporting on how Rupert Murdoch and the Wall Street Journal are positioned to fight back against the president's $10 billion lawsuit over the Journal's reporting on details of that friendship. I'll be joined later in the show by Trump biographer Tim O'Brien and the journalist and former White House correspondent John Harwood. But we begin this morning with another Trump scandal, one that threatens the foundations of the rule of law in this country. If you need any more proof that Donald Trump puts Donald Trump above the country he governs, look no further than his nomination of Emil Bovee, his former personal defense attorney, to a lifetime seat on one of the most powerful courts in America. This wildly unqualified pick is not just extreme, but it marks a turning point in Trump's war on the judiciary. The goal is no longer just to steer the courts to the right, but to bend them to his will. On Thursday, over the objections of every single Democrat on the Judiciary Committee and more than 900 former Justice Department attorneys, Senate Republicans voted to advance Bovee's nomination to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. That's the same court that launched Justice Samuel Alito to the Supreme Court. Now, here's what we know about the professional conduct of Emil Bovee, the man that Trump is trying to install on that same storied bench. As acting Deputy Attorney General, Bovee played a direct role in the firing or sidelining of prosecutors who were involved in the January 6th investigation, launching a sweeping internal probe at the Department of Justice into potentially thousands of agents who worked on the case, according to the Associated Press. At the time, Bovee accused FBI leadership of insubordination for resisting his demand to identify the core investigating team. Now, that power struggle sparked a dramatic internal standoff that shook the Justice Department. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Bovee also helped orchestrate the dismissal of a federal bribery case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. According to court records unsealed in March, Bovee argued that prosecuting Adams could interfere with his ability to support Donald Trump's immigration crackdown, suggesting politics, not justice, was the driving factor. When Manhattan's top federal prosecutor, a Republican incidentally, resigned in protest, she wrote in her resignation letter that she saw, quote, no good faith basis, end quote, for dropping the case against Adams. Another lead prosecutor, who also stepped down in protest, issued a blistering statement saying that only a fool or a coward would sign off on the dismissal of the case, and accused Bovee of betraying the principle of ordered liberty. Then came the whistleblower, Erez Ruveni, a conservative Justice Department lawyer who defended Trump's anti-immigration policies during his first term. Ruveni filed a 27-page memo, along with corroborating texts and emails, alleging that Bovee led efforts to defy court orders on deportation flights, and that Bovee even suggested telling the courts, quote, F you, except in the 27-page memo, he wrote out the word that starts with F. That's not the conduct of a federal judge. That's the conduct of a political henchman. And in Trump's second term, that's exactly the point. This nomination is not about conservative versus liberal legal theory. It's about whether we're going to allow the federal courts to become a staging ground for political retribution, whether judges pledge loyalty to the Constitution or to Donald Trump. Even the Wall Street Journal's conservative editorial board acknowledged these are not frivolous concerns. It warned that Bovee, quote, creates the impression of a lawyer comfortable pursuing policy outcomes by pushing legal boundaries, and that confirming people like him could affect whether sitting judges choose to retire, meaning even conservatives don't trust Trump's judgment on this. In fact, 80 former federal and state judges, Republicans and Democratic appointees alike, wrote to the Senate, warning that Bovee's, quote, egregious record of mistreating law enforcement officers, abusing power, and disregarding the law itself disqualifies him from this position. Confirming him, they said, would not only compromise the integrity of the courts, it would set a dangerous precedent that judicial power may be wielded in service of personal fealty rather than constitutional duty, end quote. And yet, Senate Republicans are advancing his nomination anyway, without even allowing the whistleblower to testify. Democratic senators walked out in protest right before the vote. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker called the process insane. Senator Dick Durbin said Bovee's record raises serious red flags. And they're right, because this is bigger than Emil Bovee. It's about the kind of justice system Trump is attempting to build. In Trump's first term, he leaned on the Federalist Society, you'll recall, a conservative but legally principled organization. That seems to be over. Trump now mocks the Federalist Society. He called its founder, Leonard Leo, a sleazebag. He doesn't want conservative legal minds. He wants personal fixers holding the gavels. In Trump's own words, Bovee is a man who will, quote, do anything else that is necessary to make America great again, end quote. And if you think this ends with one federal appellate court seat, think again. Emil Bovee is 44 years old. He could shape American law for the next 4 decades. There's widespread speculation that Trump's goal is to groom him for the Supreme Court. The Senate's job in this whole thing is to advise and consent on the president's most senior appointees, not to rubber stamp loyalists. Judges were never meant to be instruments of executive power, not if you live in a democracy, that is. This is a test of whether the Senate still takes its advice and consent role seriously, or whether conservative constitutionalism means anything at all. And it's a test of whether we're willing to let the courts be weaponized against the very system that they were built to defend. Because if Emil Bovee is handed a robe and a lifetime appointment, despite whistleblower allegations, despite ethical questions, despite warnings from across the legal spectrum, Congress will not just be confirming a judge. They'll be planting a legal time bomb inside one of the most powerful courts in the country. For more on this, I'm joined by Melissa Murray. She's a law professor at NYU, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast, and an MSNBC legal analyst. Melissa, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is an important question. And the thing here is to separate the idea that elections have consequences. Yeah. You get a Republican president, they're going to put in Republican judges, and that's something people accept. Emil Bovee seems to represent something different than a conservative mind on the bench.
No, I think that's right. And I think we have to look at the difference between this second Trump term and his first Trump term in terms of the approach to the judiciary. As you said, in the first term, the president basically outsourced all of his judicial nominations to the Federalist Society in tandem with the Heritage Foundation.
Yep. They'd have lists, basically.
Right. And all of the judges, I think, for the most part, were vetted to have certain conservative legal movement credentials. And they, I think, were very focused on achieving certain conservative legal movement priorities, the overruling of Roe, the degradation of the administrative state. Now we have the Federalist Society in retreat with the administration. And instead of focusing on those larger conservative goals, although those are still very much in the picture, we are instead seeing a judiciary that is being assembled with the expansion of executive power in mind, and particularly the expansion of this executive power. And that, I think, is largely different. You're right, elections have consequences. The president has the right to put whatever team he wants in the Justice Department, and he has staffed the Justice Department with his former lawyers, Bondi, Dillon, Blanche, all of those. But the courts are different.
Yes.
The courts are not the president's team. And we have seen over the course of these last long 7 months that it's really only been the judiciary that stood up to this president as we've had a very compliant Congress and a very exhilarated executive willing to go to the mattresses for this president.
Our viewers may remember the 2005 nomination of Harriet Miers, who was President Bush's personal attorney. And people thought that was untoward. Well, conservatives, Republicans thought that was untoward.
Very much so.
Different story. I mean,
different time.
Different time, different story. This is not, I mean, the Senate does not seem to be taking, or at least Republicans in the Senate do not seem to be taking responsibility for the fact that this guy just might not meet the qualifications.
No, I think that it's a really important comparison. So in 2005, Sandra Day O'Connor stepped down from the court. George W. Bush wanted to nominate a woman. He nominated his personal attorney, Harriet Miers. She's a graduate of Southern Methodist University's law school, not quite fancy enough for those in the conservative legal movement. She also wasn't known to them. She wasn't part of that circle. And they raised real objections and eventually managed to shutter her nomination. She withdrew, and the president nominated Justice Samuel Alito, someone with sterling credentials and someone who was very well known within the conservative legal movement. We are not seeing that kind of outcry today. Emil Bovee is certainly credentialed. He is a graduate of Georgetown Law School, all of that. He has all of the important credentials. but he has some things that I think would have been disqualifying in a judicial nominee before. There are a lot of incidents from his time as a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York where complaints were raised by both defense attorney and people within the department about his temperament. There is a very serious allegation of his alleged efforts to withhold exculpatory material in a prosecution. That is absolutely unethical conduct if, in fact, it is true. And those complaints and accusations were made against him. That would have scuttled someone's nomination just 10 years ago for a judicial seat. But now it's not disqualifying. It actually seems to be credentialing.
Hold that thought. We want to continue this conversation on the other side. Melissa Murray stays with me. More Velshi after a quick break.